really quick right now. Just go through all the steps so that you have that really compact in the video, and then you can go over it. And yeah, before we introduce the next step, because if you're not familiar with Express yet, like how to use the app and routes, etc., then does not make sense to introduce the controllers, etc. So what we're gonna do first, we need to create our. Just gonna leave that here. Those files, we're not gonna use those. We're just gonna keep them there for later. So first, what we need a new JavaScript file, which is gonna be our server. I'm gonna call this new index or new server.js. So this is basically empty right now. So to start that, I need to check here in the package.json. We have our scripts here, and so here for npm start, we have this command here that's executed each time we run yarn start or npm start, right? So instead of executing source index, which is our application that we have right now, let's say now we want to start our new server, right? So what we need to do, just change that to new server. So basically that way you can execute any file in here, right? So I executed that, so now I have a script that I could run with yarn run start. Yeah, so nothing happens because we don't have anything in here, right? So it runs an empty JavaScript file, nothing happens. So what's the first step we need to do to run Express? Import Express from Express. Right, so we already have that installed, so we don't have to edit via yarn. Okay, so first step, what's that? What we need?
The body parser.
Body parser. Even before that? First, we need to create our Express application, right? So now we have our Express application. Afterwards, now we can configure it, right? So first thing we need to do is now we just have that app. It's not doing anything, but we want it to actually serve content and like start up itself. How do we do that?
Set up the port.
Set up the port, exactly. So what's the function call for that? Yeah, we can create a constant first. Yeah, that's a nice way. Let's run it on port 3000. Okay, so how do we start the server? App.listen, exactly, and then the first argument is going to be the port, and then it's going to get a callback function which is executed afterwards. So that console log server is running on port. There we go. And then we also get an arrow here as first argument, so we can if arrow, then console log arrow. Right? So, okay, this is our basic setup. Now let's start that again. Look at our console, and we say server is running on port 3000. We can test that if we open up, like we just use Postman, then call that port, send. Then we're actually getting a response here. So like error cannot get slash. Okay, but we see we're already getting a response from our server. So server is running. We see that here. So this is our basic step. Question?
Is that HTML? Is that coming from Postman?
No, that's coming from Express actually. That's the default error page from Express. Okay, so now we have our server running, and now we can just put all kinds of functionality in there. So let's say we want to return some content on the URL slash dishes. How do we serve some content under the URL slash dishes? App.get, exactly, and then as a string slash, yeah, let's call that dishes or recipes. Respell it.
Like that.
Yeah. Okay. So now Express knows to do something at when we call that URL with a GET request, and then we pass it a function which is going to be executed. Right. So this is going to be executed every time we call recipes. Right. So what does that get as arguments from Express? First request, response, and what else? Next, exactly. Let's just learn that next, which we can use. So like console log, we say like here called recipes, right? So now we're calling recipes. Let's see what happens when we call recipes. Go to Postman /recipes send. Could not get a response. Why is that? Oh, it's because our app crashed here. We have next is defined but never used. So let's ESLint disable next line. Or what we can also do if you want to disable something for a whole file, ESLint disable, and we just want to no unused vars. So that way you can disable certain rules for that whole file. Also handy. Okay, so now let's see our app starts. Server running on port 3000. We call it, and it's loading and loading. Why is that? It has nothing to do. Exactly. So it's calling that function, but it's not doing anything. So if you want to return a response, what do we return? Return response. And then we want to return some JSON. So like here, message, this works. But yeah, this is the kind of stuff you need to do. Like go step by step through that, and then play around with the application, with the code, see what is working, what arguments are available, console log, what's in there, what happens if you change something, to get familiar with the Express application. Right. So you really have to like put in the work and write code, make errors, see like, oh, did that crash, or why did that crash? And then what's being executed when? Is that executed? Like what happens if I don't put recipes? Like what code is executed? And then maybe let me add like another route, etc. And that way you like get familiar with Express. You have to really try out different things. Try out things, console log tons, like see if something crashes, how that behaves, so you learn the application, right? Okay, so now we have our recipes. This returns a response, and let's see what that looks like in Postman. And then here we get our response. Right. Okay, so now we have done that. This is basically a response, and we can also add our models here, etc., like we've done before. Now let's try that with the middleware. Right. So here, how do we add a middleware? It's like we want to create a middleware that's executed for each step. App.use, exactly. What do we pass it? We pass it. What kind of data type do we pass to that? A function, exactly. So, and what kind of arguments does that function get? Error request response next. So what kind of middleware would that be? What?
Error handler.
Exactly. This is going to be an error handler because we have 4 arguments. So let's first call our next function because we want to make sure that the next request is executed. So let's see here. This is middleware is running. So that way you can learn and understand how the middleware behaves. Like, right, just add a middleware here. And now let's see. Let's run the request. See here. This works. So this is going to be executed. Now let's see in our console log. called recipes, so we don't see our message that's here, middleware is running. So this is not executed for each request because we're having an error middleware. So if we remove this, what happens then? What? Should be executed, right? So we remove this here. Now we have normal middleware that's executed for each request. So now we restart our server here, does it automatically. And now let's execute this and see our console log output. So like here, middleware is running, called recipes 2 times, because I clicked the button 2 times. So that way you learn how Express works and when it's executing what functions. And then basically you can just plug in your logic there. Right? So, okay, so now we have that middleware. Let's just add that error middleware again, real quick here. What do we need to do? Like use again. What kind of function do we pass now? What kind of function? What does that function look like for the error middleware? Bless you. Exactly. So we have a function. What kind of arguments does the error handler middleware have? Error. What else? First request. Oh, request, response, next. Okay. And if you want to return a response here, okay, let's see. When we console log error handler middleware is running. So now let's see here. We have the server running on port on that port. Let's execute our function. This works. And we see like the error middleware is not executed. Why is that? Because there's no error. How do we add an error? Yeah, so what we can do is just like here create another route here, false route. So then we have request, response, next. Okay, so how do we, so this should be executed here. Console log, false route. Okay, so how do we, let's first create an error. So like here, error. We can put that in a variable, so like just create a new error. And then we give it a message here. This is my first error. So how do we get that error to the middleware? Exactly, so then we call next, and then we pass it our error. So here we've just created an error, pass that here, and then we pass that to next. So let's see what happens now. Now we have servers running at port 3000. We send it. It's like middleware is running. So that's on recipes. How do we call our error? Here we gotta call the other route. So now it's loading. It's not doing anything. Why is that?
Because it doesn't have anything to do.
Where exactly?
On line 22, 23, 24.
Yes.
It doesn't have the error in the before the request.
The gal is not receiving the error. Right.
So we see here, error handler middleware is running. So that line is executed here. Well, what do we need to do so that we actually get a response and it's not stuck here? We have to return a response here. Return response.json. Then we can return a response here. Message, then error.message. Then we, how do we set the status code?
Response.status.
Dot status, and then we pass that code.
Status, not
Just, I've written it too many times. All right, so now let's see, false route. This is my first error. There we go. This is something you have to play with a lot. Like, yeah, implement that, pass this data around, console log tons, and implement those functions, middlewares, etc., so that it becomes second nature.
Good way to do it. Just build a super basic server and plug stuff in.
Yeah, just play around with code. Like, don't try to follow like step-by-step guides, but rather like implement an application. See, like here, be curious. So like here, when is that executed? Why is that not executed? Like, try to figure it out. Like, get in the code. Like, add some console log statements. And then just build stuff. Like, try to figure out things. Like, why is that route executed? Like, what happens if I send a post request here? You know, like, what happens if I send a post request on that URL? Like, what's happening right now? Yeah, but that way, like, if you're curious and you try to figure out those things, like, just do it. Like, just implement it, make an error, and then figure out, like, how you can make it work. This is the essence of basically learning how to program.
There's I just put a link in the channel to the express.com